Welcome back folks, Brigadier Fox here. I'm very happy because today we've got a special informational and analysis video because we just received a massive update on the IL-2 Korea project from the team at 1C Games. A second gameplay footage has been revealed and there's a lot of stuff in it worth breaking down. In this video we're going to take a closer look at the new museum mode, aircraft configuration and markings, the redesigned HUD and radial control system, the updated damage model, firing effects and sound design, the massive Korea map and its new environmental technology, pilot interactions, system requirements, and the official 2026 roadmap for both IL-2 Korea and IL-2 Great Battles. There's a lot of things to see and some of these features confirm things we've only read about in devlogs until now. If you want to stay fully up to date with the project, I highly recommend joining the official IL-2 series Discord server. That's where the latest announcements, discussions and direct communication with the developers and testers usually happen. Alright folks, let's get into it. The gameplay starts on the main menu, which looks identical to the one we already saw in the MiG-15 gameplay released about 2 months ago, but this time the featured aircraft is the American F-51D. Almost immediately after that, we are taken into the new museum section. As we already know from previous development updates, IL-2 Korea is introducing a dedicated museum feature where players will be able to access detailed technical information about each aircraft, including cockpit layout, system, historical context, and even the technologies used during the Korean War. One of the most interesting aspects of this feature is that it provides full access to flight and combat specifications such as wing loading, aircraft weight, maximum fuel capacity, and performance data across different altitudes. We already saw this system in action during the first MiG-15 gameplay reveal, where the free camera movement allowed the player to explore the aircraft in full 3D and interact directly with various systems by clicking on them, opening the canopy, deploying flaps, operating air brakes, and so on. That same level of detail is shown again here in the new footage, this time with the F-51 on display from multiple angles. On the bottom of the screen we can see a series of action icons representing available interactions, including what appears to be control surface movement, flap operation, navigation lights, canopy control, and some more curious icons such as a propeller symbol and what looks like a pilot figure likely tied to additional systems or crew interaction. We can also see a simplified illustrated documentation panel that highlights cockpit instrument locations and descriptions, making it much easier to familiarize yourself with the layout before actually flying the aircraft. And one detail that I find fantastic is that this museum mode is not limited to flyable aircraft. It also includes AI control units such as transport vehicles, tanks, artillery, trains and ships, and even ground equipment like radar installations and searchlights. These are likely to be mission objectives or targets in various scenarios, and being able to examine them closely in advance is incredibly useful. You can rotate them, inspect their structure, and understand their visual profile, which will make identification in actual missions much easier and more intuitive. After the museum section, we're taken to what appears to be the aircraft configuration screen, likely the final setup phase before entering a mission, whether in career mode or multiplayer. This is something we hadn't seen in the first gameplay reveal, so it is worth taking a closer look. The first thing that stands out is the currently selected aircraft, in this case a beautiful looking F-80 Shooting Star. At the bottom of the screen we can see the tactical code selection, similar in concept to what we already have in IL-2 Great Battles. However, we know from previous devlogs that the entire marking system has been redesigned for IL-2 Korea. The numbering system is now significantly more flexible, supporting up to 8 digits, and the layout and composition of markings are designed to better reflect the Korean War period. In addition to that, IL-2 Korea is introducing a dynamic victory marking system. These markings will update based on the aircraft you shoot down. In multiplayer specifically, it will display your most recent kill streak on the server you're currently playing on, which is absolutely amazing. Returning to the configuration screen, on the right hand side we can see the current weapon selection, payload options, gun conversion settings, and fuel load for the mission. There is also a modification section where we can choose optional equipment. In this case we can see the JADO system available, a jet-assisted takeoff configuration using small booster rockets. Across these sections, the interface clearly displays the additional weights of each selected component, and at the top we can see the total aircraft weight dynamically updating based on the chosen configuration. Visually, the interface looks pretty clean, organized and significantly more modern compared to what we're used to in Great Battles. Now, the weapon customization screen is particularly interesting. The weapon appears to be grouped logically, likely allowing separate control over different types of guns, probably caliber related. More importantly, it seems that ammunition belts can be customized per individual weapon. From what we can see here, this suggests the possibility of assigning different ammunition types to different guns. For example, mixing incendiary and armor-piercing belts across separate 50 caliber guns. Each projectile type is also described clearly in the interface, which adds transparency to our loadout decisions. Finally, in the payload section, we can see an extensive list of available configurations, each with a detailed description. External fuel tanks are selectable here as well, which aligns with the Korean War operational context and longer range mission profiles, especially with the insanely big map we will have in the game. Moving on to one of the features many of us have always enjoyed in IL-2 Great Battles, the paint scheme and livery selection. At first glance, the system looks familiar and consistent with what we already know from Great Battles, but what really stands out here is the level of care being put into the liveries. Based on the devlogs, every included paint scheme in IL-2 Korea is being recreated with a strong emphasis on historical accuracy, and we'll also have access to some of the most recognizable markings used by well-known aces of the Korean War. In addition to the historically grounded liveries, there are also special paint schemes tied to the game's pre-ordered editions. For example, the F-86A includes a livery representing the US Air Force aerobatic team, the Sky Blazers, one of the early USAF demonstration teams that followed the Navy's Blue Angels. A MiG-15 livery that features a scheme inspired by the Red 5, an early Soviet aerobatic unit, and the F-84E with livery connected to the US Air Force Thunderbirds, one of the most iconic demonstration teams in American aviation history. And there's one more detail that I genuinely love. IL-2 Korea will allow customization of pilot helmet paint schemes for American pilots. This was a real historical practice during the Korean War, and it's a small touch that adds personality and one additional layer of customization. And now we finally see the mission spawn. The F-80 shooting star is parked on the airfield with AI ground units moving around the base, and right away, at least from my impression, the visual upgrade is pretty clear. Just by looking at the cockpit texturing, the ground surface detail, and even the surrounding props all look noticeably sharper and more physically grounded. As we already know from the development updates, IL-2 Korea is running on a heavily upgraded version of the Great Battles game engine, which itself traces back to the original Rise of Flight technology. But this isn't just a minor iteration, several major technical improvements have been confirmed. One of the biggest transitions is the move to PBR, or physically based rendering, which fundamentally changes how material responds to light. That alone has a major impact on how metal surfaces, paint, glass and terrain textures behave under different lighting conditions. The game engine has also transitioned to DirectX 12 graphics API, which should improve performance scaling and modern hardware utilization, especially in more complex scenarios. On top of this, we now have atmospheric visualization based on a physical light scattering model. This is particularly important for a Korea area setting where haze, humidity and long sightlines can significantly affect visibility and depth perception. The landscape decal system has been improved as well, allowing for more natural runway markings and airfield integration, especially on uneven terrain. And finally, something that stands out immediately, the pilot's body is now rendered and visible in the cockpit, adding another layer of immersion that I personally find amazing. These are just some of the confirmed upgrades mentioned in the devlogs, and even in this short span sequence, we can already see how many of those improvements are starting to come together visually. And here we get a look at the redesigned HUD. This is one of the most significant changes coming to IL-2 Korea because it represents a completely new approach to how flight information is displayed and how aircraft systems are managed. From the latest devlogs, we already knew that the heads-up display system was being fundamentally reworked. At the bottom of the screen, we still see a familiar layout similar to Great Battles, where essential flight parameters are displayed in real time, like heading, altitude, airspeed, ammunition status, and other core data. According to recent devlogs, the team is planning to make this interface fully customizable. The idea is that players will be able to choose which virtual instruments they want visible and which ones they prefer to hide. For example, you could add RPM indicators or temperature readouts if you want more engine data on screen, or keep the display minimal for a cleaner experience. But the real innovation here is the new circular or cross tile in HUD control menu. This integrated radial system allows you to manage aircraft systems directly without relying entirely on memorized key bindings. It was designed primarily with gamepad users in mind, but it will be available regardless of your control setup, and for those of us flying in VR, this could be especially useful. So instead of pausing the game or searching for the correct key combination, you can just access systems through a structured visual interface built directly into the HUD. And while it's not shown in this particular gameplay segment, we also know that IL-2 Korea will include a dedicated aircraft status and damage display. This will allow players to quickly assess which components or systems have been damaged, making post-engagement evaluation much simpler and more intuitive. We then see the F-80 shooting star beginning its taxi toward the runway. Interestingly, this appears to be some kind of solo mission, as there's no visible wingman or squadron formation nearby. It could potentially be a training scenario, a free flight, or even a light operational or intercept mission. The F-80 was originally designed as a fighter, but during the Korean War it was widely used in the fighter-bomber role. In this case, the aircraft is carrying only external fuel tanks, which suggests a longer range profile, possibly reconnaissance or interception mission. There's noticeable activity across the airfield, with ground units moving around and even several B-29 parked nearby, which immediately adds scale and atmosphere to the environment. As the F-80C reaches the runway and begins accelerating, we start to see one of the major structural changes introduced in IL-2 Korea. Airfields have been completely redesigned. They are no longer perfectly flat surfaces. Instead, they are now featured visible terrain variation and subtle elevation changes. You can actually see here and kind of feel this in the aircraft movement, as the F-80 reacts to the uneven ground during takeoff roll. In IL-2 grade battles, we are limited to 3 primary surface types: concrete, compacted soil, and dirt. According to the devlogs, IL-2 Korea expands this system significantly, introducing a broader variety of ground materials. This should have a meaningful impact on taxiing, takeoff, and landing behavior. Visually, the airfield layout also benefits from the upgraded decal system and PBR-based rendering. Runway markings blend more naturally with the terrain, and the overall texturing feels more integrated into the landscape. Combined with the ground activity and environmental detail, the airfield no longer feels like it's a static surface, it feels like operational and alive. Once airborne, the new atmospheric lighting system becomes much more apparent. From altitude, you can clearly see how the environment reacts to light in a more physically coherent way compared to previous generations of the game engine. IL-2 Korea introduces an advanced atmospheric model designed to represent visibility conditions based on time of day, weather, and altitude. So what you're seeing isn't just a visual filter, but it is a simulation of how light actually scatters through the atmosphere under different conditions. And what is particularly interesting here is that the influence of these factors is not strictly local. It extends into the way haze forms across distance, how shadows are projected, the intensity and diffusion of natural light, the color and depth of the sky, and even the visual appearance of the sun itself. As altitude changes, the density and quality of the atmosphere shift as well, subtly affecting contrast, clarity, and horizon visibility. The result is a sky that feels volumetric and alive rather than static. It's one of those upgrades that might not immediately stand out in a screenshot, but once you see this in motion, like we are seeing here with this new footage, especially during climbs and long-range flights, the difference becomes much more noticeable. Here the screen fades to black while flying the aircraft, which could simply be an edit for pacing, but it also aligns with the confirmed time skip feature. Once airborne, players will have the option to fast forward to the operational area and after the engagement quickly return to base, skipping long transit legs if they choose to. Here we see the F-80 jettisoning its external fuel tanks. This confirms that we will likely have the option to deliberately release them when needed, typically to reduce drag and weight before entering combat. And at higher altitude, we finally get a wider look at the Korean landscape. The core flyable area measures 440 by 440 kilometers, roughly 194,000 square kilometers, with an additional render margin extending the detailed terrain to 500 by 500 kilometers. One of the most impressive aspects of IL-2 Korea isn't just what we see in the air, but the sheer amount of historical reconstruction happening on the ground. Because the Korean peninsula has changed dramatically since the 1950s, modern satellite data simply couldn't be used to recreate the map. Coastlines have shifted, Islands have merged, entire urban areas have expanded into reclaimed land, so as a result the team at 1C Games had to manually rebuild historical terrain using topographic maps, correcting projections, rivers, vegetation and even cartographic inconsistencies from the period. The result is a 500 by 500 kilometer map featuring over 8,000 kilometers of coastline, including thousands of kilometers of rugged island shoreline. Roads and settlements are being rebuilt entirely by hand, with more than 1,000 bridges already placed. Technically, the map benefits from physically based rendering or PBR, DirectX 12 graphics API, deferred shading and a completely upgraded environmental system including new vegetation, ground textures, atmospheric modeling, dynamic lighting, landscape shadows, night illuminations, 3D railway tracks, telegraph poles and a much more diverse road network. So, in short, this is not just a new theater of war, it is a full-scale reconstruction of 1950s Korea built from the ground up. And here we have what appears to be first enemy contact, likely a patrol unit approaching from the distance. The aircraft we are seeing here looks like the LA or La-11, the final piston engine fighter developed by the Lavokin Design Bureau. It served with all three socialist aligned forces involved in the Korean War, the Soviet Union, China and North Korea, making it a fitting presence in the early war scenario. On the socialist side, the La-11 won't be alone. We already know that the Yak-9P will also be available, a late evolution of the World War II Yak family. While it saw limited service in the Soviet Union itself as jet aircraft were beginning to replace piston fighters, North Korea received dozens of them before the outbreak of the war. And then there's the IL-10, the direct successor of the legendary IL-2. Significantly faster than its predecessor and purpose-built for ground attack, it was deployed to North Korea and participated in combat operations from the very beginning of the conflict. And of course, the aircraft that will come to define the air war over Korea, the MiG-15 BIS, the most mass-produced jet fighter in history and the aircraft whose introduction dramatically shifted the balance in the skies, forcing the United States to respond with the deployment of the F-86 Sabre. And now we reach my favorite part of the gameplay because we get to see some combat sequence. What we're seeing here is the kind of fight that defined the early Korean War. An early jet like the F-80 Shooting Star against a late piston fighter like the LA-11. Watch how the F-80 handles the engagement. After each pass, it doesn't stay to turn, it goes straight back to the vertical, converting speed into altitude and resetting the fight. That's classic early jet doctrine. Speed is life in a jet, and once you lose it, you are in big trouble. A piston fighter works very differently. Aircraft like the La-11 are generally more comfortable at lower speeds and can handle tighter turns when the fight slows down. If the jet tries to stay horizontal and bleed energy, the advantage quickly shifts. So the jet pilot has to stay disciplined, make fast passes, extend, climb, reposition, come back down with speed. Boom and zoom or even boom and run is going to be daily routine for jet pilots. The moment you get dragged into a slow turning fight, you're fighting on the prop's advantages. And on the other side, the piston pilot is trying to do exactly that, force the overshoot, pull the jet into a horizontal fight, make it bleed speed and exploit the slower throttle response typical of early jets. This contrast in tactics is what made this engagement so unique. It wasn't just about which aircraft was better or faster or better armed. We are dealing with the best of the best from both sides and aircraft types, jets and props, so fights in IL-2 Korea are going to be about who has better control of the geometry of the fight. And during the fight, we also get a small preview of the new damage model. Thanks to devlogs, we know the system has been completely reworked. Structural elements like wing spars now have dedicated collision modeling, meaning you can weaken a wing progressively instead of it just snapping instantly. Even holes in the skin by bullet or fragmentation damage creates additional drag and affects performance. Control systems are no longer random either, control lines have to be physically hit to fail. Engine damage is now modular both for piston and jet aircraft, with specific components like cylinders, compressors or turbines taking individual damage. Fuel tanks are physically modeled, include self-sealing behavior and react differently depending on the type of ammunition. And now damaged parts can detach and behave physically, with panels bending or tearing under airflow. The F-80 finally returns to base and performs a forced landing, ending in what's called a belly landing. This gives us a closer look at how crash damage behaves in the new game engine. Previous devlogs have already shown examples of improved crash physics, particularly during hard landings and structural impacts. With the upgraded physics system in IL-2 Korea, environmental interactions appear to be much more dynamic, resulting in more believable structural deformation and surface damage during ground contact. And what's really interesting, after the crash landing, we even see some ground units coming to our rescue. And then the video ends with something I honestly wasn't expecting at all. After that belly landing, instead of the mission just fading out or simply ending like we have in Great Battles, we open the canopy through the radial menu and the pilot just casually climbs out and walks away like absolutely nothing happened. As we already seen in previous devlogs, pilot interaction is becoming a real part of the simulation. First, there's now an optional pilot body visible in first-person view, which is especially relevant for VR users. Since not everyone prefers this, it can be disabled in the settings. More importantly, pilots can now exit and re-enter their aircraft. The way this happens changes depending on the situation, whether you are on the ground, performing an emergency landing, ejecting, or even under unusual flight conditions. These scenarios are being fully animated. Pilots will be able to walk, run, and even swim after bailing out or landing in water. This opens the door to more dynamic battlefield scenarios. And it is not just pilots, ground personnel are also becoming more alive. Airfields and cities will include animated crews, infantry units, and vehicle operators, each model individually. Even specific crew members like drivers or gunners can be taken out independently. Alright folks, we have reached the end of the new gameplay footage, and after seeing all of this, you're probably wondering what kind of hardware you will need to run it. Here you have the full system requirements so you can review them yourself, and you might want to start upgrading your RAM now before you have to sell your card to afford it. And before we reach the end, we have some amazing news for both IL-2 Korea and Great Battles in the new 2026 roadmap. According to the official timeline, we can expect the Steam listing and the start of a closed beta testing in spring, so roughly somewhere between March and May. Then in summer, things really begin to move. Early access is planned, along with the official release window and the reveal of the first DLC, so that will likely fall between June and August. In autumn, we're looking at early access for that DLC somewhere in the September to November timeframe, and finally winter brings the full DLC reveal, closing out that year with what should be a major update. So if everything stays on track, 2026 is going to be a very active year for IL-2 Korea. But that's not all, because there are also significant updates planned for IL-2 Great Battles. The Odessa and Leningrad Siege and Liberation module has already been released. It focuses on the early and late stages of World War II, covering the sieges and eventual liberation of both theaters. It includes 2 large historical maps, Odessa and the Gulf of Finland, along with 8 new aircraft ranging from the I-153 and early Yak variants of the Bf-109E4, Junkers 87D5, IL-2 and the LA-7. Looking ahead into 2026, summer will bring career expansions for Leningrad 9044 and Odessa 9041, along with the long-awaited Bomber DLC entering early access, and that's a really big one. The Bomber expansion is something the community has been asking for pretty much years, so seeing it finally entering early access this summer is huge. Autumn is expected to finalize the new career content and introduce the P-47M Thunderbolt. Then in winter we are looking at the full release of the Bomber DLC, along with the arrival of the P-39Q Ira Cobra. So, between Korea launching and Great Battles receiving long-awaited Bomber content, 2026 is shaping up to be one of the busiest years the IL-2 franchise has had in a long time. Alright gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this analysis of the new gameplay footage and the 2026 roadmap for the IL-2 series. We have taken a close look at what appears to be near final gameplay, and we were able to confirm many of the features we have been reading about in previous devlogs and official updates. If you want to stay fully up to date, I highly recommend joining the official IL-2 series Discord server, as it is the best place to get the latest information and even interact directly with the developers and testers and ask all your questions directly to them. One more thing guys, remember pre-orders for IL-2 Korea are already available with a nice discount in case anyone is interested, including the Standard Edition and the Founders Edition for those who want to support the development of this amazing project. I will definitely keep following this project closely, as it is one I am personally really excited about, so please let me know in the comments if you would like me to continue covering future IL-2 Korea updates here on the channel. Alright folks, that's gonna be it for today's video. Thanks for watching and staying until the end. I'm Brigadier Fox, see you in the skies.